Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to Friday, everyone's favorite day of the week. Big plans for the weekend? Aliana? Huh? You're just gonna sleep? Boring.
What can I do during COVID?
That's true. Not much, I guess. Netflix and yeah, I get it. Hadil, what about you? Big plans for the weekend?
Actually, I found shit
Yeah. 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 Yeah, it's that it's that time of the term where you have to do those kind of things, right? Right? Okay. Let's see who's here this morning. So Michaela's here. Good morning. Ananda's here. Hello, Ananda. Good morning. Kevin's here. Hello, Kevin. Ayushi's here. Hello, Ayushi. Mohammed's here. Good morning, Mohammed. And Ashley's here. Good morning, Ashley. Shania, hello. Good morning to you. And Ty, good morning. And Rose, good morning. And Shafan, good morning. And Ryan, good morning. Or morning, if you will. Okay, good stuff. So I'm sorry for the delay getting started this morning, people. As you online people don't know, but we're just having some projector issues here, and so I hope to have that fixed so that people in the room can actually see what we're doing. But until then, we'll just go ahead and we'll muscle through, right? Because that's all we can do. But of course, online you'll be able to see what I'm doing, so that's good. Yesterday, we moved on to the Cold War, right? So we were talking about Joseph Stalin. We talked about kind of his years in power in the Soviet Union. We said, of course, that once he succeeded Lenin and pushed his challengers aside, Bukharin and Trotsky and some others, he took control of the Soviet Union and ruled with an iron fist, right? Or a ruthless fist, if you will, right? And so we talked a little bit about the Ukrainian famine or Ukrainian genocide, however you want to frame it, right? Where he effectively starved 6 million people who were somewhat resistant to the Soviet regime, but also he needed their grain, right? Because he was in the process of trying to industrialize the Soviet Union. We said the Soviet Union was years and years behind everybody else in terms of industrialization, and they needed to catch up, and catch up they did, right? So with the help of a heavy tax on the people and the slave labor of about 10 million people, and sort of people enduring a low quality of life, the Soviet Union does industrialize. And so in a shocking 12 years, they are competitors with Britain and France and Germany and Japan, which is almost unbelievable, right? But of course, when you kind of look behind the curtain and you see how he accomplished it, maybe it's not that unbelievable. Maybe when you enslave 10 million people and can basically, tell people exactly what to do, and if they don't do it, you can murder them. Maybe it's not all that surprising, but either way, he manages to do it. And so by the time we get into 1940 or 1939, when World War I begins, he is kind of pretty well, maybe not ready to fight a war, but they are industrialized. And so they become a power to be reckoned with. Of course, we've talked about their experience in the Second World War. And when it's over, we'll see that the Allies, so the Soviet Union and the US and Great Britain, that alliance will kind of fall apart. The Western powers never really trusted the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union never really trusted the Western powers. And we said again that both sides had kind of a paranoid fear of the other one engulfing them, right? So the Soviets were always concerned that the capitalist West was trying to destroy socialism, which is somewhat true. And of course, the West felt that the communists were constantly trying to, overthrow them from the inside, which is also a little bit true. So their paranoid fears were not entirely paranoid. And so these two sides kind of come to distrust and despise each other. And of course, that leads us into this period called the Cold War. And the Cold War will, the Cold War will take us from about I'm going to start it at about 1945. We had a little bit of a conversation about when the Cold War actually begins. Some people have actually, if I remember correctly, some people have actually traced it to the uncovering of a spy, a Russian spy, a Soviet spy, in the Canadian embassy in Ottawa in about I think it was like 1944 or 5. And so some people have traced it to that even. And so, you know, historians probably debate on exactly where to begin the Cold War, but I'm kind of thinking that, you know, as soon as World War II is over, it's on, right? The alliance that was holding these sort of Western powers and the Soviets together is gone, and so now they are, you know, staring at each other across the table with suspicious, you know, mistrustful eyes. So I'm going to basically call it there. And so again, both of these powers have different kind of ideologies. They have different ideas about how countries should be run. They have different ideas about the relationship between the individual and the state, right? And so they are going to find each other, they are going to be at odds with each other, they're not going to trust each other, and they're worried that one side is trying to destroy the other, which is, again, somewhat true. We said that there was two terms, and I'm sorry you can't see this, you'll just have to go. Do you have it there? Yeah? Do you have it there as well, or are you just listening? There's like a 10, 12 second lag, but that's okay. All right. If you can't see it, it's okay. Don't panic. So there's two kind of terms that we said we would need to know. One is this term of containment, right? And so that will kind of be the official U.S. policy. The Soviets will kind of exert their sphere of influence, which is the other term, over Eastern Europe. And so the West will basically decide, okay, that's as far as we want communism to spread, and we will do our best to contain it, to keep it from spreading any further, right? And so there'll be kind of a Soviet sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, and Western Europe will be under kind of the Western sphere. And so we'll have these two sides kind of, you know, as awkward, untrustful next door neighbors, right? And it'll be split. This will come to a head in a number of places in Germany and in Berlin, because that's where the two sides are closest, right? So Germany will be split in half, and then inside of the eastern part, inside of the Soviet sphere, there'll be the capital of Berlin. And Berlin will, as we'll see, will be split into 4 pieces. One that's controlled by the US, one that's controlled by Britain, one that's controlled by France, and one that's controlled by the Soviet Union, which seems completely bizarre and unworkable, but that's what they decide at the end of World War II, and that's kind of that's the Europe that we kind of enter the Cold War in. Again, it's a strange arrangement, I think, but you know, when you have two sides that will not agree on anything, I guess that's what you come up with, is an agreement that shows there's no compromise between them. I had a map on the screen the other day, and I don't now, but if you're online, you can see it. And of course, there's a kind of a red half, which is under the Soviet sphere of influence, and then there's a blue half that is under the Western sphere. And again, it's split right down the middle of Germany, with the capital in Berlin inside East Germany, but still has an Allied or a Western presence there. So what I wanted you to do is, if you could, I wanted you to do some reading. And so, what's that? If you could. If you can. I already know you can, so it's too late. So what I'd like to do is have you read from the textbook. And so for those of you online, you can see the pages I'm looking for. For those of you in class, I'm going to ask you to read from about 175 to 183, but don't read any of the purple, don't read any of the purple sections or so. So there's a few pages that you can skip over within that section, okay? So if you can see it on the screen, it's about 175 to 183. Maybe I'll write it on the board here for people in class just so it's easy for you. And then I'll ask you to answer some questions at the end of the chapter, 1 through 5, 7, 8, and 11, which kind of sounds like a lot, but that's okay. So maybe what I'll do is I'll put, what's that? Yeah, I'll put 15 minutes on the clock, and then we'll see where we are, okay? So I'll turn you loose to do that. Online people, of course, the reading is in Microsoft Teams for you, so you can look at it there. So I'll put 15 minutes on the clock, and then we'll check back in 15 and see where we are, okay? So I'll let you read that. Okay, ready, shreddies? No? Let's make a start of it anyway, okay? Maybe we don't get all the way through, but maybe we at least get part of the way through some of these questions, okay? So my first question for you is this: two results of the Second World War that led to the Cold War. What would you tell me for that?
Other than something like the Polish question and the German.
Let's see. I think that's probably more the answer to number two. I think number one, maybe they're just looking for some very broad general statement.
Difference of ideologies and interests.
Okay, so we have a difference of ideology and interest between the Soviet Union and kind of the Western powers. So on one side we have a autocratic, communist, socialist country, and on the other side we have a democratic, capitalist block of countries, I guess. Right? And what else do you think? Is it just one? I'm going to check my notes here and see what I have for that one. Okay, that's part of it, right? The fact that we have two blocks, we have two groups with different ideologies, different goals, and they don't trust each other, right? Neither side trusts each other. What's the other thing that happens toward the end of the war that kind of defines, I guess maybe I'll give you a hint here, it kind of defines how Europe is divided? There's what?
There's spheres of influence.
There are spheres of influence, and what kind of determines those spheres of influence in general?
The spheres are determined by like a meeting between Stalin and Churchill.
Say that one more time, sorry?
The spheres of influence were determined in a meeting between Stalin and Churchill.
Right. That approach is hammered out in some meetings between Churchill and Stalin, but it has to do with armies. What's the thing about armies?
Well, the East was completely occupied by the Red Army.
Right. Right. So the spheres of influence are connected to liberating armies, right? And so whoever pushes the Nazis out of a certain country stations their army there, and that kind of eventually will be its sphere of influence. And so for Stalin and his Red Army, he's managed to move into and liberate most of Eastern Europe, and so Poland and Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Romania. There's one I'm forgetting. What am I forgetting? Don't know. Either way, Stalin's Red Army liberates those countries, and so they will kind of fall under the Soviet sphere, right? Whereas, I guess in the east part of Germany. The west part of Germany and France and Italy and so on, those will be liberated by the Allies, and so they'll be under this democratic sphere, right? So whoever the liberating army is what determines what sphere you fall into. And of course, we have these two kind of controlling powers that deeply distrust each other, right? Okay, so there's three issues. So at the Potsdam Conference, that's at the end, that's the Treaty of Versailles for World War II, if you will. The Potsdam Conference, where they try to hammer out what Europe is going to look like post-war, right? And there's three things that these two sides have difficulty agreeing on. What are those three things? What are those three things that they can't agree on? It was lunch, right? The Russians wanted to order Thai. The Allies wanted to order Chinese. They couldn't agree. It was a big mess. What's that? Right. So there was the question of what to do with Germany, right? What's it going to be? Because of course both sides had a bit of a presence in Germany and Berlin. how was it going to be? Was it going to be divided, and how? Who was going to govern or administer Germany? What to do, right? So Germany was one question they couldn't initially agree on. What was the second one? The Polish question. Right? What is the Polish question?
Holland wanted like to move the border because he occupied the east part of Poland.
Yep.
He wanted to move the border westward into Germany. So the Allies weren't really sure about that.
Right. So there's some disagreement about the borders of Poland, right? So if you remember, Poland was created at the end of World War I in about 1919, and 20 years obliterated Poland entirely, right? Poland did not exist for about 4 or 5 years. Now they're trying to reconstruct the borders of Poland, but there's some disagreement about where those borders should go, right? And so what's the importance of Poland for the Soviet Union and Stalin? What's that?
Supposed to be a buffer zone to the west.
Yeah, so Stalin doesn't want to find himself living next door to a bunch of capitalist Democrats, right? And so he wants a little bit of a buffer zone. And so Poland in part is going to provide that for him, right? A little bit of a cushion between him and the West. And the other countries in Eastern Europe are going to serve that purpose as well. So Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, all of those countries are going to serve as a bit of a cushion between Stalin's Soviet Union and the West, right? So he wants that to happen. The third one, what's the third one? It's the borders and the governance of Poland, I guess the borders and the governance of Germany. And what's the third? Third thing at Potsdam. Say what? A little hint. I've actually forgotten. Those are the ones that stuck in my mind. So okay, Tehran, dispute. That's confrontation. Maybe the Polish question is 2 questions. True. I think it might be. Maybe it is. So Poland is the governance and the borders of Poland.
The government.
Yeah.
And then Germany.
And then the Germany thing. Okay, maybe that's the 3. I'm okay with that. Hey, how you doing, Steve?
I just got your message.
Yeah.
What's going on?
I don't know. I plugged in as I usually do, and then I went to hit HDMI,
Alright.
and nothing.
Nothing,
It tells. I checked. I changed the cable, so this is my second cable.
Okay.
Everything seems to be plugged in securely. I had a look up there. It looks okay. I can't imagine how it would come unplugged.
No, I don't think it'll be unplugged up there, but.
I've turned it on and off.
How
I,
about
I
your-
swore at it a few times.
Okay.
Yeah.
Usually that would have worked.
I know.
Did you reboot your laptop?
That I did not do
Okay.
because I'm kind of midstream at the moment.
Okay. Then I'll come back later on. And-
Well, probably what I'll do is we had a video to watch later today. Sorry, online people, I'm streaming at the same time here. So we had a video to watch a little bit later, but maybe we'll deal with this and we'll just finish a bit early, and hopefully it'll be
Okay.
magically
If you wanna drop
resolved.
by later after this, and if you want to test it out, sure.
Okay.
Here.
I will if it happens in the next room too. I'll definitely reboot my computer, but
Okay.
I think for this morning there's not much to do. I think.
All right. Okay.
Okay.
I'll see you later.
Thanks, Steve. Have a good day. Okay. Let's see. Page 196. Okay. So I think we've kind of covered 3 and 4, right? We've covered what the what the Polish question is, right, and what the German question is. What do they decide for? What do they decide? Maybe not for Poland's borders, but for Poland's government. What's going to happen in Poland?
Was supposed to be free and fair election.
Yeah.
Stalin made them as free and fair as possible, made them all communists.
Right. So Poland was supposed to have a democratically elected government. Elections do occur, and we see that they kind of get a mix, right? They wind up with a Polish, not a Polish, they're all Polish. They wind up with a communist president who is, or prime minister, sorry, who is aligned with Moscow, and then their president and their foreign minister are non-communists, right? And so we've got part of the government that is kind of leaning toward the West, and then we've got a prime minister who is leaning toward, what's that? Yeah, and is interested in being a puppet of Stalin, right? Which of course is what Stalin wants. And so the government exists for a short period of time, but then what happens? I think is their foreign minister killed, or is it their president? It's Eduard Beneš or something, right? Is it after confrontation? No. Help me out here, people. There it is. Oh, I'm thinking of Czechoslovakia, not Poland. A little bit later it will try to be. A little bit later it will try to be. We'll see, as kind of the decades go on, we'll see some of these countries attempt to gain some more freedom from Moscow and the Soviet Union. Some will be successful, like Poland. Poland will gain a little bit more freedom under Soviet control. Places like Hungary won't be so lucky, but that won't be until kind of the 1960s or so. Okay, I'll tell you what. Let's take a little break here. We'll come back. We'll finish some questions, and then that'll be it for today. Okay, but let's take a break for now, and then we'll come back. All right. So, we are back. So, we've talked about the beginning of the Cold War here. Two sides, mistrustful of each other, former allies in the Second World War, but as the war kind of winds down and the threat of the Nazis kind of disappears, these two realize that they are not, in fact, best friends, that they are not, in fact, frenemies. They are enemies, right? And so we have occupying armies in Europe, which kind of develop into these spheres of influence over which these larger powers, the Soviet Union and the US, will have kind of influence and control, right? And so at Potsdam, these two sides are trying to hammer out an agreement. Of course, they are not really cooperating at this point, and so a lot of things don't get settled in a collaborative, cooperative fashion. It's more of an antagonistic fashion. And so, as you can see from the map, I'm not sure if there's a map handy, but Europe is basically divided down the center with the Soviets kind of in control of the eastern side and the Western powers and the US in charge of the western side. We said that the Polish question, and I kind of messed up a little bit there because I confused Poland with Czechoslovakia. But Poland, of course, Stalin had originally promised a democratic government, but of course that wasn't really what Poland was going to get, right? He sort of ignored the Allies' calls for democracy and simply installed his own government. It was Czechoslovakia that actually had elections, right? And Czechoslovakia has elections, but they kind of return some Western-leaning candidates and some candidates that lean toward Moscow, and eventually they get pushed out or murdered, and Stalin basically gets his hooks into Czechoslovakia as well, right? So most of these Eastern Bloc countries eventually are going to fall under communist rule, and they're going to take their orders from Moscow. So whatever kind of government they have in place, Stalin's calling the shots, right? Again, with the exception of Yugoslavia, but we'll deal with Tito and Yugoslavia shortly. I asked you what happens with the Soviet-American confrontation in Iran. What happens there?
Wait, the map you're looking for is on page 184.
184? Okay. The look on your face there was like, oh, let me tell you about that. So what goes on with the Soviet-American confrontation in Iran?
So you know how Iran is placed in the middle of the Middle East, and how the south of Iran is like all the way on the Persian Gulf and the Oman Sea, and the north is with the Caspian Sea.
Yes.
So in the war, that was used as a supply line to take Allied aid up to the Soviets.
Right.
Also, the country is filled with oil, so that's something good they all wanted.
Yeah. That
But-
never hurts.
But the decision was that after the wars ended, six months after that, everyone would just leave the country alone and get. So they say here that that was the agreement between the Soviets, the British, and the Iranian government, which is kind of debatable because once you control the country, the government can't say anything but okay.
It's true. It's true. They might not have had much choice in saying okay, but
They actually kicked the Shah out and replaced him with his son.
with his son, yeah. In the process of that,
Yeah, just
Or-
once Iran fell,
yeah.
they did that because the Shah said no, we're not going to let you in.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Anyways, the Russians didn't like to go back, and they supported a communist revolt. No one liked it. The Westerns didn't like it, and they had the UN. So they put pressure on the Soviets, and the Soviets were forced to just let it go.
Right. So yeah. So we've got kind of all of the Allied powers in Iran prior to the end of the war. Right. Iran is a useful supply line for the Soviets from the Allies. Iran has lots of oil, and nobody minds getting their hands on some oil. But of course, the agreement is that once the war is over, these Allied powers will vacate Iran and, leave the Iranians to their own devices, right? But the Soviets decide that maybe they don't want to leave. Maybe they want to hang out in Iran for a little while longer and support maybe a communist overthrow of the government in the country, right? But of course, the Allies are operating from a policy of containment. They don't want the Soviet Union to spread their communism any further, and so they managed to gently convince them to leave Iran, right? Which they do, right? So there's a little bit of diplomatic negotiation and pressure, and it seems to work, and they're able to encourage the Soviets to leave Iran, right? Number 7 is about the Truman Doctrine. This is an important thing, this Truman Doctrine. What is this? Who's Truman, by the way? Yeah, Harry Truman, a true man. I don't know. Harry Truman, U.S. president, right? He succeeds Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Dwight Eisenhower, I think, will succeed him. But right now, we're dealing with Harry Truman. And what's this Truman Doctrine? I think that's a direct quote, isn't it? The Soviets are not cool.
Exactly.
It's not good. We have to stop it. That almost sounds like something Donald Trump would say. But Truman says something a little more eloquent, right? What does he say? What's the quote? Fortunately, Harry Truman was a better public speaker than Donald Trump, and he says something. What does he say?
Well, there is this newspaper article thing.
A newspaper article thing?
Yeah, that justified the U.S.
Perhaps.
Some page 180.
One.
Just above the Marshall Plan.
Oh, George Kennan. Is it George Kennan?
Yeah.
So he's Department of State official. Okay. Before that, I think it's before that. Yeah, the Truman Doctrine. Here it is.
To support free people who are resisting subjugation by minorities or by outside pressure.
There it is. Yeah. So Truman says, he says that the United States must adopt a policy to support free peoples who are resisting subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures, right? And so what does that mean in kind of regular terms? Paraphrase that for me, if you will. That's at the bottom left on page 180. Paraphrase that for me. Right. So if there's people with guns in your country trying to overthrow your government, the U.S. will intervene, right? The U.S. will swoop in and help you out, right? And why do you think that's such a big deal? Because I said it was a big deal, but why is it a big deal?
Like, I didn't get you.
Why is the Truman Doctrine a big deal?
It was considered as the official beginning of the Cold War.
That's true. Some people could mark that as kind of a watershed, right, of a beginning of the Cold War. That's certainly true. What else? Why else might it be significant?
I'm not sure the US say come out of isolation.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So I think I've said a few times in this course that prior to this point, the United States that we're dealing with is not the United States that we kind of know, right? The United States that we know is very interventionist, right? They're all around the world. They're sticking their nose in other people's business. They're fighting wars in other countries and, helping out this side and that side. And again, some of those things have been helpful and some of those activities have not been helpful. But prior to that, we're dealing with a United States that's more isolationist, right? They're kind of doing their own thing in North America. They usually have a booming economy. Sometimes they're dealing with a depression, but they really don't want to get involved in everyone else's business, right? They don't want to, in World War I, that's a European war. We don't want to deal with that, right? And so they kind of don't until almost the very last minute when the Germans, kind of draw them in by trying to enlist the help of Mexico, right? And then in World War II, they're kind of staying on the fringes as well, supplying the Allies, but not really doing anything, till the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, and then they're in. And so up until that point, they've kind of been wanting to mind their own business and just let other countries work out their own stuff. But this is a big turn for them. This is Harry Truman saying, we are now looking outward. We're not looking inward. We're not isolationist anymore. If there are countries anywhere around the world where armed minorities are trying to overthrow the government and threaten free peoples, and basically you could read that as threaten democracy, the United States will be there, right? And you can almost imagine him saying this with his hands on his hips and a cape flowing behind him, right? He's like, we will be there to rescue you, right? So this is a kind of a heroic statement or whatever, but it's a big change for the United States, right? And so this is the United States kind of stepping into the role that maybe we're more familiar with them as, the global policeman, if you will, the country that's all over the place trying to, help people out or simply advance its own interests, or both at the same time. But this is kind of the beginning of that. And so the Truman Doctrine is important because it's a historical marker, possibly for the Cold War, but also in the history of the US and kind of the role it plays in kind of world politics. And so this is the beginning of the US stepping forward and saying, we're going to be in everyone's face from now on, whether you enjoy it or not, right? Right, so this is the Truman Doctrine, right? And then Marshall Plan. Let me just see. Did I ask for 8 and 11? Okay, Marshall Plan and okay. So what's this Marshall Plan thing? The Plan of Marshall. George Marshall, to be exact. Secretary of State. George Marshall. What's his plan? Right. So the plan is to provide funds, lots of funds, right? $13.2 billion in 1945. I don't know what that equates to now, but it is a giant chunk of money. He's going to provide it to European countries. Why on earth would the U.S. want to just dump a bunch of money into Western Europe like this? They're so generous, the Americans. But, They have what?
They have some kind of benefits.
Sure, but what's the benefit? Not quite.
That happened when that was the Soviets' fear. They were afraid if they accept the funds, the Americans could track them and then find out that the Soviets are.
Yeah, this is often the case with aid like this. Usually countries provide it and they don't just say, here's $10 billion, have fun. Usually they say, here's $10 billion, we want to know how you spend it. So you have to report back to us where the money is going, right? If you just hand over $10 billion to a country, some dictator will probably pocket the money and you'll never see it again, right? So the United States is going to insist on reporting to make sure these countries are spending it appropriately. The Soviets don't want to report that because they're worried that it will make them look bad, which it will. But why are they giving them all this money?
Because in that article we said that in economically, politically, and socially weakened Europe can fall into communism.
Yes.
Now, when you give them money, you strengthen the government. They can rebuild themselves, get their economies rolling, and politics and all that stuff comes back, and they basically get strengthened up.
Right.
And they kind of resist the Soviet expansion.
Right. So the problem is that after the war, again, you know, Western European economies are fragile, right? You've got lots of damaged infrastructure. You've got a lot of war debt, right? People have paid a lot of money to go to war, and now they're kind of broke. There's high unemployment. There's a little bit of chaos. And when you have that situation where the economy is kind of in a depression and people have no money, communism looks great, right? Communism is like, hey guys, we can have a communist revolution, and then the state will give us everything we need. Everyone will have a job, right? Because that's kind of what communism promises, right? That everyone will have a job, everyone will be given what they need, we'll all be equal, it'll be great, right? So when your economy is, you know, in the dumps, communism looks awesome, right? And that's what the Americans are afraid of here, is that if they leave Western Europe to just kind of deal with its depression on its own, that the people might turn to communism, right? And so George Marshall's solution is that we've got to pump a whole bunch of money into these economies, get this capitalism thing going again, get people working, get them spending money, and when people have jobs and money and can afford things, then they don't want communism, right? They'll be happy with their current quality of life. And of course, as we know, the people in the Soviet Union are not experiencing any kind of quality of life at the moment, but nobody knows that, right? Nobody really knows outside of the Soviet Union. So George Marshall's plan is to inject a bunch of money, get these economies going, get people back to work, spending money, earning, raising their quality of life and their standard of living. And again, that way they won't want to turn to communism, right? So the Marshall Plan is going to inject huge amounts of money into Western Europe. Interestingly, they also offer aid to Eastern Europe and to the Soviet Union, which of course Stalin politely declines, right? But I think it's funny that they offered it to him anyway. So they will decline that aid, even though, to be honest, they could probably use the money. But again, a lot of money is going to get pumped into Western Europe in order to rebuild those economies and get people working. And I think that sort of process is really exemplified in this Berlin blockade thing, and that's question 11. So this is the craziest thing I've ever heard of, but what happens what kind of gets this Berlin block, what happens? What's going on?
Well, Stalin gets into this, like, arguments with the other people, with the Westerns.
Yeah.
And what he ends up saying is that, well, do whatever you want. I want to blockade your supply lines, and I want to see how would you feed your people. So Truman comes up and says, just not fly them in.
Yes. So what happens at the end of the Second World War, of course, is that Germany is partitioned into two pieces, and the Western powers control the West and the Soviet Union controls the East. But inside East Germany is the capital of Berlin, and there's 3 administrative districts that are still controlled by the Western powers, right? By France and Britain and the US. And after a few years, Stalin is getting annoyed, right? He's thinking, why are these guys still here? Berlin is firmly within my sphere of influence. This is the Soviet sphere. What are these Western powers doing? I don't like them here. They're annoying me. I want them out, right?
Yeah, I just remembered the reason of their dispute. West Berlin was getting really prosperous and starting to look nice. The Easterns were still living in a post-apocalyptic state compared.
Right.
And they didn't have any food, anything. They could just really go to the western part of the city and come back. There was nothing to stop them. So they did. And they start getting the ideas of, yes, a long trip to the west of Berlin, so why don't we just move there?
Right.
And they did. So the Eastern factories lost workers, and the economy started to go even worse.
It's true. So that there's going to start to be an inequality between West Berlin and East Berlin, right? So in the West, the Allies are dumping a bunch of money. Maybe we should call them the Western powers. The Western powers are dumping a bunch of money into West Germany and West Berlin. And so their quality of life is going up, right? They're getting jobs, they got money, they're dressing a little nicer, maybe they can buy nicer things. Meanwhile, in East Germany and East Berlin, the Soviets are stripping anything that's useful from Germany and bringing it back to the Soviet Union. And so East Berlin is kind of impoverished and brown and, you know, gross and just not very nice. And West Berlin is getting kind of nice and glamorous, right? And this will continue throughout the 40s and 50s and 60s. And eventually, Khrushchev will be so annoyed that he'll put up a wall between the two so that the Eastern Berliners can't see or know what's going on in Western Berlin. But we'll get to the wall later. But you're correct, right? It's going to start to look bad. And so Stalin is annoyed. It's looking bad. You know, these Western powers are right next door, which he really doesn't like. And so he decides to basically hold the entire city of Berlin hostage, right? So he closes off road and rail access and basically says, get out of Berlin or all your people are going to starve, right? And so, again, we know Stalin is no stranger to starving people out or signing people's death warrant. And so he doesn't mind basically cutting off the food to Berlin and saying, you Western powers, get out or I'm going to starve all of your people, right? And so, and then the craziest thing happens. What do? They start flying everything that these people need into Berlin for how long? From when does it start? It starts in, I think, June of 1948, right before my dad was born, interestingly, all the way to May of 1949. So 11 months. The Allies are flying, not the Allies, the Western powers, the US is flying in everything that Berlin needs. Food and clothing and medicine and cooking oil and cooking fuel and toilet paper and everything that the Berliners need. I assume the Berliners used toilet paper in 1949. Everything that they need is being flown in for 11 months, right? And so I think, I think the statistic is that a plane was landing every 4 minutes or something like that. So, yeah, planes are just constantly, that's that? Every 3 minutes? Every 3 minutes, a supply lane. Why would they? Why do this? Because you've got to know this costs a lot of money, right? To fly everything that these people need in for 11 months.
Also affecting the US economy, because inflation was going up, they're flying all this stuff.
Maybe.
They did that because it was kind of like a show force when Stalin was telling them, yeah, we got this, we're doing this, what you gonna do? If you back down and say, okay, you're showing that you're weak, but when you do that, you're kind of like slapping Stalin in the face.
Yeah, he's basically, this is almost a bully situation, right? So Stalin is trying to bully the Western powers into leaving Berlin, right? He's basically, you know, yeah, he's holding Berlin hostage, right? And so if the Western powers back down, then it's going to make them look weak. And again, the question is Stalin going to say, oh, well, they backed down there, maybe I'll just take West Germany as well, and we'll see if they back down again, right? And so this is a small battle, but the Western powers, the US knows it has to stand up to him, right? And so almost unbelievably, they fly everything these people need in for almost a year, right? Nearly an entire year they're flying in the things that West Berliners need to survive. And so finally what happens?
What's the heck? Instead of respecting them, let's just
No. Yeah, Stalin gives up, right? He's like, ugh, this is not working. They're not leaving. Damn it. Okay.
Stalin didn't stop the airplanes.
Well, that's the thing, right? So Soviet planes were kind of attempting to interfere with these cargo flights, but what did the Americans do?
Well, they probably just showed the yay bomb to the Soviets, and they backed down.
They did exactly that, right? They stationed some B-29 bombers, which are the ones that carry nuclear weapons. They stationed a few of those in Britain. Very easy access to the Soviet Union, right? So that's exactly what they're doing. They're like, hey, remember the atomic bomb? We're just going to put it right over here, right next door to you, just in case you forgot we have it. It's right here, right? So again, there's a little bit of threatening going on as well, right? But again, they managed to pull it off, and it's the craziest sounding thing, but they do it, right? And so eventually Stalin is forced to say, okay, fine, this isn't working clearly. And he opens the roads and the railways again, and Berliners can eat fresh food again instead of dry, preserved food. I don't know why they couldn't fly in vegetables, but anyway, I guess
I don't know if they didn't fly vegetables.
you get what you get, I suppose, when you're trying to resist the Soviet Union.
I don't think there were any vegans back then.
No,
So,
vegans weren't invented yet. Okay, people. So I'm going to call it there because, again, we're just about out of time. On Monday, I'll show you, we'll start watching the video that I wanted to watch. I'll try to give you the assignment for the final paper, which will be due on the last day of class, so you'll have a solid 3 weeks to work on it. Yes? It'll probably be one question, or I may give you the choice of a couple. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do. So, but I'll give that to you on Monday so that you can get started. I'll try to get your papers marked by the end of the weekend too, so that you can have some comments back and you can kind of safely and confidently begin your last paper. But what's that? Oh, and the quiz. I'll try and mark the quiz as well. Good grief, I got a lot of work to do. Okay, that is all for today. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Yes, and I'll see you.